What is the world's greatest unsolved mystery? Story 1. The Indus script, also known as the Harappan script, produced by the Indus Valley Civilization. It was a huge civilization in northern India and Pakistan, around 3,300 to 1,300 before Christ. It spanned more area than any other civilization at the time. Despite many attempts, the script has not yet been deciphered, but efforts are ongoing. Story 2. Satoshi Nakamoto. Regardless of what you think about Bitcoin, this person or people invented and implemented it holds a stash worth billions and then just disappeared. None of their Bitcoin has moved since, and we would know the moment it does. We know which coins in the blockchain are theirs, and it's watched like a hawk. It's like something out of a movie, but it's 100% real. The current value of his stash is approx $42 billion. Story 3. The brain. The organ that can understand the universe and manipulate it using advanced technology that was devised based on the understanding, but struggles to figure out how the brain actually functions in real time. We know some things like functions of certain areas and how its failure changes the way we experience life, but we can't explain the collective manifestation of those experiences, the consciousness. Story 4. Aside from the big existential questions, I'd like to know the whole story of D.B. Cooper. There was an old TV show in the UK called Tales of the Unexpected that was presented by Roald Dahl. It was mostly adaptations of his short stories, but they did one based on D.B. Cooper. In it, the twist was, it was a conspiracy from the pilots and cabin crew working together. They made up the story of the person, gave him a generic description, deliberately let a few notes go out of the plane to make it look like he jumped and then went off with the money split. It's a fun theory, in my opinion. Explains how the guy essentially vanished into thin air with no sightings since. Story 5. Alcatraz escapes. Soleil. Did they survive? Family members of the guys have since come out with letters and photographs of them from South America. They lived for a long time. One of them died of cancer and had written to the authorities asking for medical care if he turned himself in. They ignored it. They ignored it because there was no proof of it being real. No DNA found on the letter matched. If you want something like this to work, you need to prove that you are who you say you are. The other proofs are just some testimonies, pictures where you don't recognize, and old recordings that could belong to someone else from the family. But no bodies were found, meaning that there is still no certainty. Story 6. Would be pretty cool to know who Jack the Ripper was, or who killed the Black Dahlia, or whether the guy writing letters to the police as the Zodiac Killer was actually the one committing the murders. I'm putting my money on ancient aliens being the answer to all three. The Jack the Ripper theory I subscribe to is that it was a butcher and not a surgeon. A butcher would have the know-how to make those cuts and kills. If he was caught outside covered in blood, he would have a better alibi than a surgeon. A butcher would make more sense for the neighborhood. A surgeon would have stuck out and likely had difficulty navigating the streets of Whitechapel undetected after dark. Regardless of profession, the killer was almost certainly someone who lived in the neighborhood. Though located in a large city, Whitechapel was in some ways more akin to a town. The people who lived there worked there and didn't have a lot of reason to leave there, nor were there a lot of reasons for non-residents to go there. Beyond government officials, neighborhoods in 19th century cities were pretty insular, and you didn't see as much movement between them in that period as you do today. The Ripper got absurdly lucky to not get caught. It's likely that he was jailed for another unrelated offense, institutionalized, or died. As he was just some guy, we're never going to know who he was or why he stopped. Story 7. Where are Juan Perón's hands? In 1987, the hands of deceased Argentine President Juan Perón were cut off of his body and stolen from his tomb along with his cap and sword. Members of his political party received a ransom note requesting money for their return. 6 men were arrested and 5 arraigned, but no charges were made against anyone. His hands are still lost, and no person has still been charged. Story 8. What Jesus was doing in the middle of his life. Oh, theologian, ecclesiastical historian here. There's a very good chance Jesus was involved in the ongoing construction projects in the city of Sepphoris. The word translated carpenter in most English versions of the Bible probably means something like builder, rather than someone exclusively working wood. Herod Antipas conducted a number of projects in the city in the early 1st century, and Nazareth is only a short walk from there. As the major commercial center in Galilee, Jesus likely spent much of his life there, carrying on the trade. Story 9. Dark matter and dark energy. In the standard Lambda CDM model of cosmology, the mass energy content of the universe is 5% ordinary matter, 26.8% dark matter, and 68.2% a form of energy known as dark energy. Thus, dark matter constitutes 85% of the total mass, while dark energy and dark matter constitute 95% of the total mass energy content. The leading explanation is that dark matter is some as yet undiscovered subatomic particle. The other main possibility is that dark matter is composed of primordial black holes. Story 10. What happened to Yuba County 5? This one is my personal favorite. I can't even begin to extrapolate anything that makes any sense. I think they probably ran into some bullies at the basketball game or gas station who recognized that the group was mentally deficient and tried to give them a hard time. Maybe one of the five said something to defend the group, and the bullies retaliated by trying to give the five a scare by chasing them along the highway up to the mountain. By the time the two of them made it up to the shed, they were still legitimately scared and afraid to attract any attention. Then, after a few days without his psychiatric medications, the one guy in the group with schizophrenia developed even more paranoia, to the point that he was afraid that using any of the supplies in the shed or starting a fire might attract attention. Story 11. What actually happened during the Dyatlov Pass incident? I know they officially said it was a landslide fairly recently, but the events surrounding it are way too bizarre for that to explain everything. Not really. The events around it can be pretty clearly explained as injuries from the avalanche, hypothermia, paradoxical undressing, animal scavenging, and bodies exposed to the sun for weeks. Yes, that bit about the time taken to find the hikers often gets left out in retellings. The way it's often told is like someone went to take a leak and he came back to find all their friends dead. Other claims like radioactivity and strange lights appear nowhere in original reports and seem to have been added on later. Story 12. What is God? Every single civilization in the entire world has come up with their own answer to that question. Why? There's something out there that billions of people throughout history have all experienced. And when you strip away layers of allegory and myth, you come back to a core that is strangely similar throughout history and across cultures and continents, but extremely difficult to put into words and not especially easy for anyone who hasn't experienced it for themselves to understand. But also, everyone who has personally experienced just gets what is being talked about almost without needing it to be explained. Whatever this thing is called, everyone who has been touched by it has a touchstone to understand everyone else who has also experienced it. Yet nothing else in all of humanity's shared experience has been more elusive and hard to define, nor more divisive when attempts are made to define it. We know that it's there. Almost every culture in the world agrees that there's something out there just beyond the grasp of the five conventional senses. But what? No other mystery is more fundamental, enduring, or profound. Story 13. The Lost Settlers of Roanoke. There's several reasons as to why they possibly disappeared, but no definitive answer. One prevailing theory is that they were abandoned by the British and basically folded in with the local native population. This theory is supported by the fact that there were several natives that started to use white Anglo names, but the only thing left behind by the settlers was the word Roanoke, carved into a tree. The Dyatlov Pass incident is pretty interesting as well. A group of hikers went missing on a mountain in Russia, and they were found with their tent cut open and the bodies sporadically around the area, some of them eaten by local animals. No one has really been able to explain why they decided to abandon their tent in the middle of the night during a storm. They weren't really dressed at all and mostly perished in the surrounding area. There's been many interesting theories, some including radiation from nearby power plants, but they were very experienced hikers, so no one's really been able to come up with a 100% proven theory. Story 14. What happens after death? As older family members, especially like my dad, pass, it's like they finally know the answer to this unanswerable question, and the rest of us are slowly inching to that point ourselves. If there is nothing, will the end at least bring a feeling of peace until our body and brain cease to function? If there is something, is it something good? When we die, will we finally know the meaning of it all? My cousins always go together to visit a psychic about once per year to chat with dead family members. My dad and I made a pact that he'd give my childhood nickname as a message for me if it's any of that. Very few knew this nickname. Story 15. To me, gravity. I'm a physicist, so I am biased. However, we still don't understand it at its extremes. Einstein gave us some ideas with the space-time concept, but that doesn't work on super tiny scales, quantum mechanics, or super big scales, galaxy clusters. We have to account for dark matter and quantum gravity. We don't understand either, and it's just this mess of half-understandings. My vote goes to a scalar boson, graviton. That isn't saying scalar bosons are the solution. Rather, I find them to be the most elegant and probable. However, the universe has a tendency to not care what we think is probable or elegant. Story 16. can't believe nobody's mentioned the 1987 Max Headroom incident. Way before the time of Anonymous, three people in stylized Max Headroom, a now forgotten obscure TV movie character. Masks hacked into the syndicated TV broadcasts of two Chicago stations and started spouting off random disjointed pop culture references before taking off their pants and promptly getting spanked and cussed out by a dominatrix. All on live TV, all in the span of barely 2 minutes. The hackers were never found despite an investigation by the FCC, and despite the fact it would have taken both major technology expertise and an extremely powerful microwave transmission. This was during the analog era, the latter especially being not something that could be done by random pranksters. The statute of limitations for criminal punishment passed in 1992, but no one has ever come forward or been identified. Story 17. It has to be aliens. Are they here? We're here? I think they must almost certainly exist, given the vastness of space. It's scientifically very unlikely that life or entire ecosystems haven't developed elsewhere. As a side note, one thing that did make me sleep easier at night was reading one Redditor breakdown why, if aliens do exist, it's much more likely they have no interest in us, or at least not in the way the movies provide. Perhaps they are in need of some type of resource we can't comprehend. But considering the math behind time or space travel, the resources it would consume to reach Earth from an unobservable planet would outweigh the benefit from coming here. Like how someone did a breakdown of why the Matrix doesn't make sense, because farming humans for power is counterintuitive. I don't know if it's been debunked or whatever, but there was someone on Reddit earlier this year who did say they worked in some wing of the US government and that we should expect trickles of info to pour out little by little over the next few years to acclimatize the global public. Almost every shred of evidence I've been exposed to about aliens is a hoax or a bunch of fantasy. And yet it just has such a hold on people. Like at the back of our minds, I can't escape the feeling that there's someone watching us or there's something out there. Story 18. Disappearance of Asha Degree. In 2000, a 9-year-old girl packed a bag in the middle of a storm and was last seen walking down a highway. A driver approached her to help, and she ran into the woods and was never seen again. Nothing suggests why she would run away. Her book bag was found a year later. Most likely she was abducted while walking. But why did she leave her house in the middle of a raging storm? Story 19. I love unsolved mysteries, but one that always gets me is the murder of Missy Bevers. She was assassinated in the early morning at a church that she taught yoga at. Security footage from the church showed the murderer roaming the halls of the church all night. But that's not what's weird. What's weird is that the murderer was dressed head to toe in police riot gear. It is the weirdest and eeriest video footage, and it's just unsettling. There's lots of theories, but her murder has never been solved, and I believe there hasn't even been a real suspect in the case. Story 20. The disappearance of the Springfield Three is a top contender for me. Long story short, in the early morning hours of June 7th, 1992, these three women, Cheryl Levitt, 47, her daughter Suzanne Susie Streeter, 19, and Susie's friend Stacy McCall, 18, all vanished from Cheryl and Susie's home following a night of fun and partying as it was the girls' high school graduation. All their personal belongings, their cars, purses, and even the little dog was left. There were no signs of a struggle or foul play, however. The front porch light's glass globe was broken and not swept up, and there was a weird message on the answering machine that accidentally got deleted. Yet, no trace of the three women has ever been found, and the case remains unsolved 30 years later. Story 21. One I'm always fascinated with is, I believe in the mid-2000s, a student at Ohio State mysteriously disappeared, and to this day they have no idea what happened to him. Basically, he went out to a popular bar with friends. The security camera sees him walking into the bar, and this is the only entrance/exit, as the bar is in a larger building, but it never sees him leave the bar at the end of the night. His name was Brian Schaffer. It's an interesting story/mystery to take a look at. Story 22, the Yuba County Five. One of the detectives interviewed at some point said, "Not a damn thing about this case makes any sense at all. 5 guys with minor disabilities go to a basketball game. They have their own very anticipated game to play in the next morning. One of the guys even laid out his uniform for the next day. They leave the game they were spectators for. On the drive home, they stopped to buy snacks. The wrappers were found in the car and the cashier remembered them. Then instead of going home, they'd drive miles and miles out of their way to a national state park, leaving their perfectly functioning and fueled car to wander unprepared into the snowy wilderness. A witness claims to have seen a second vehicle, and perhaps a woman? A convenience store nearby claimed to have seen them the next day, but 3 of them are found dead in the woods, believed to have died from exposure. A 4th one is found in a trailer in the woods that had sufficient food and heat sources to survive for quite a while. having apparently starved to death and losing 200 pounds before succumbing to that and hypothermia. He had approximately 13 weeks of beard growth. The last man has never been found. Story 23. Where is the tomb of Alexander the Great? My absolute favorite theory is that with the rise in Christianity, people didn't want to venerate a pagan anymore, so they stopped taking care of the tomb. Later, someone claimed that the abandoned tomb was actually the tomb of Saint Mark the Evangelist, the patron saint of Alexandria. For centuries after his death, people routinely wrote about visiting Alexander's tomb in the city. Then all mentions of it go dark. Then people start talking about visiting St. Mark's tomb in the city. I think it was convenient to reframe the grand tomb to venerate a new person. The twist is that supposedly in the 9th century, the Caliph of Egypt ordered the tomb of St. Mark destroyed. Some Venetians in the city then stole the body and smuggled it back to Venice. St. Mark was also the patron saint of Venice. Venice still has those bones, or at least they have some bones that are said to be those bones. If this theory is true, then his body is in Venice. I wouldn't bet money on it being true, but I so much want it to be true. Source: Mystery Files from National Geographic. Story 24. Who really murdered the princes in the Tower? The Princes in the Tower refers to the apparent murder in England in the 1480s of the deposed King Edward V of England and Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York. These two brothers were the only sons of King Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville, surviving at the time of their father's death in 1483, when they were 12 and 9 years old, respectively. They were lodged in the Tower of London by their paternal uncle and all-powerful regent, the Duke of Gloucester. This was supposedly in preparation for Edward V's forthcoming coronation. However, before the young king could be crowned, he and his brother were declared illegitimate. Gloucester ascended the throne as Richard III. Story 25. The disappearance of a 9-foot great white shark off the coast of Australia. In 2003, researchers tagged a 3-meter, 9-foot female great white shark to measure water temperature and at what depth. However, the shark disappeared 4 months later. The tag was washed ashore, and the researchers found out that the shark dived to a depth of around 610 meters, 2,000 feet, where the temperature shot up from 7 degrees Celsius to 25 degrees Celsius, 46 degrees Fahrenheit to 78 degrees Fahrenheit. This caused them to believe that the shark was eaten and are now on the hunt for the creature. Story 26. The consciousness. A child is conceived, and at some point, once the brain becomes complex enough, it starts to develop a feeling of self. It starts to perceive itself as the center of something, and everything else is outside. We naturally distinguish the I from the rest of the world. This is a light that goes on in the head at some point. In deep sleep, under narcotics, or after injury, the light can flicker or go out. When we die, the thing that is me is gone forever. Or is it? Religion says it's not. It's an everyday mystery that gets more mysterious the more we think about it. I find this to be the most fascinating question there is. Story 27. So we think the universe was created at the Big Bang, where all of the universe's matter was focused in such a small point and at such a high temperature that it led to the formation of atoms, our laws of physics, solid matter, etc. Makes sense. But what always confuses me is, how did that matter get into that point in the first place? Like, we know energy can't be created or destroyed, but it can't have just existed forever, right? Everything must have a beginning. Yet this is sort of paradoxical. You can't make something out of nothing. Sure, maybe the Big Bang happened due to the collapse of a previous universe or something. In that case, where did the previous universe come from? Keeps me up at night, lol. Story 28. I have not long ago watched a video from Lazy Masquerade. It was about an old woman who was almost deaf and almost blind. If I remember correctly, she was around 80 years old. 2 people broke into her house, put her into bed, and hurt her. She later escaped the house, went to the neighbor's home, and called the police, saying her phone was not working. Police arrived a few moments later and saw that the sheets were bloody, and indeed, the telephone was damaged, one of its main components ripped out. Police thought that she was bluffing due to the reasons I've mentioned, but seeing it right there, they fixed her phone and kept an eye on her. This happened several more times until one fateful day. The lady has been murdered, however. The police said it was a heart attack. She was found in her bed, face down, hands tied with a scarf, sheets bloody. The kids of the mother didn't believe that the police said it was of natural cause and filed a report against the department. That got nowhere. The police kept it as death by heart attack, and the murderers have never been found. This is honestly the weirdest story of all. The murderers were not found, and the police shuffled the case to be a natural death. That it wasn't. Weird, isn't it? Story 29. Maybe not the greatest unsolved mystery of all time, but one that is definitely the greatest unsolved mystery in my hometown, is disappearance of 3 boys known as The Lost Boys of Hannibal. In May 1967, an adventurous trio of boys went out into the woods near their home in Hannibal, Missouri, to explore part of its extensive network of caves. They were never seen again. The story of the Lost Boys of Hannibal has continued to fascinate people across the world ever since. Even now, 54 years later, their loved ones hope to finally solve the mystery and learn what became of the children who simply seemed to vanish into thin air. Did they run away from home? Were they trapped in one of the area's many caves? Were they kidnapped? Murdered? Everyone has their theories, but nothing has ever been proven. Story 30. The episode of Unsolved Mysteries about the writer in Baltimore who was found next to the hotel, who apparently fell through the roof of a parking garage conference room. He received a phone call and ran from his house, never to be seen alive again. A folded piece of paper and a blank check was found folded very small and taped to the back of his computer. The angle needed to make it through the hole almost rules out falling or being thrown off the hotel roof. They contacted the last call his phone had received. The one he got then ran out because, and it was a friend or someone he knew. And when reached for comment, they lawyer up and refused to comment. It's been like 2 years, and I still think about it weekly. Just so many questions and so bizarre.